Good morning. Hope you're awake. Well, you are here with us on Tuesday, February 28th in the Full Instruction Committee in Education. And Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Representatives Sapicki, Chisholm, Cochran, Darby, Dixie, Glenn, Hakeem, Hicks, Johnson, Leatherwood, McCalman, Reagan, Todd, Warner, White, Vice Chairman Raper, Chairwoman Moody. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk and members. As we do, as is our custom, to if you will stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance, and after that, our prayer will be led by our Vice Chairman Raper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll wait on Chairman White here before we begin. May we bow in prayer, please. Lord, thank you. Just so many blessings. We don't deserve it, and you just bless us anyway. And Lord, lest we always remember that we're servants. And number one, we serve our constituents in our area, and we serve the state of Tennessee. But most of all, we serve you, and we've got to keep that in mind in every decision we make. And ultimately, hopefully, it glorifies you in the decisions we make. Thank you for your Son, his sacrifice, his grace, his mercy, and now we serve a risen Savior. Lord, bless us today, and we ask out in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Members, before we get into our presentation, are there any personal orders from the members? All right. As they trickle in, well, seeing none, I know we have the one presentation today, and I do want to thank you again for being here. We have with Pearson, Amanda Pettmiller, and she's going to start off by telling a little bit about herself, and then we'll get into the presentation. And so if you have any questions, as always, if you will let our clerk know and our assistant, our research analyst know. And so members, without objection, we are out of order. Out of order.
Second.
I think. I'm not anticipating anything. We are out of session. All right.
Let's see. Now we're on. Can you hear me okay? Great. Good morning. My name is Amanda Pettmiller. I'm a director at Pearson for school assessment. I've been working on the Tennessee program now for about 4 years, and also living here in Tennessee as well. So on my way up 65, I dropped a kid off at school, middle school. I have a 4th grader at Kenrose Elementary School and a 6th grader at Woodland Middle School. It has been absolutely wonderful to, see the work that is done by educators and, the department and you all as well, kind of in action as a parent. So it's nice to sit on both sides and see what my kids are doing in school, and then sit in my seat at Pearson and also see what we're doing in assessment.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and we're glad to know you're here close by.
Absolutely.
Well, again, members, if you would like to go ahead and do your presentation, and then we'll see who all has questions.
That's fine.
For you.
That sounds good to me.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start off with one of the questions that I received, which was, how do we use Tennessee standards to develop the tests that our students take here in the state? And really, before we ever write an item that will appear on a test, our content teams use resources that are already existing. We use the standards that have been adopted by the state board. We use performance level descriptors that were created by teachers in Tennessee that really outline how what students should know based off of those standards and get into the details there. Then we use item specifications, and these specifications take those standards and translate them into kind of a roadmap for our item writers so that they know exactly how to write an item that meets Tennessee standards. Our content teams will also look at operational items, previous operational items, and see what kind of items, what these items look like, what students are used to seeing, what are the item types. So before we ever even pick up a pencil, all of these things are reviewed by our content teams. And really, this is just the start, right? So this feeds into the entire item development process. So those standards and all of the resources that our teams have reviewed and they've studied lead into where we create, look at the item bank that is owned by the state of Tennessee, and look at the assets that you have in that bank and say, where do we need to go a little deeper? Are there places where maybe we have standards where we don't have as many items, and we need to bolster that so that we have a good, even coverage across all the standards that we can utilize when we create test forms. Then once we know what items we need and how many we need and what standards we need them at, we reach out to item writers. So we have a pool of item writers that we use. I will say these are former educators or current educators. I know a few of them have been Tennessee educators as well, which is always great. I think we find that in the assessment world, when teachers retire, there's a great a bit of knowledge that they can bring to Pearson and infuse that into the processes that we have in place, whether it's for item development or for scoring, because we do have a lot of former educators that do scoring on the essays that we have as well. So then we go through a rigorous item writer training process where we're sitting with each item writer, we're walking through the Tennessee standards, we're walking through that item specification document, which is the roadmap for how all items should be written to meet Tennessee standards. So those item writers are trained, and then we give them assignments. This is going to be down to the difficulty level. You're going to write a grade 3 item to this standard, this difficulty level with this depth of knowledge that we're looking for from students. So this is where we get very specific with those item writers on what we're looking for. Then those items start to come back into Pearson from our item writers. And all of this is done in an electronic online platform that we have created where we can share items not only with these item writers, but with the department, educators that we have review items at different phases in the process as well.
Ms. Pep Miller,
Yes, ma'am.
pardon me for interrupting, but we did have a question, and we
sure.
didn't want to stray too far.
No, that's fine.
What, Chairman
Would you
Sapicki?
give us a definition of item?
Oh, yes,
Thank you.
sorry, thank you. So an item would be the question that would appear on the test that students would be measured against. So our content teams then review those items from item writers that have been trained on the Tennessee standards, and they do an additional alignment check. Does this meet the depth of knowledge, the grade level appropriateness, and the standard that we're looking to assess? And then those items from there go through source, fact checking. We have research librarians. We have, folks just doing, this process. There are so many different kind of feedback loops in the process to make sure that everything that we're putting on a test is accurate. Because the last thing that we would want to do is do anything that would, undermine the assessment, make the Department of Education or you all or ourselves look like we're not doing the proper processes to ensure we're collecting the results and measuring what we need to measure. So we'll go through that source and fact checking process. We'll do editorial reviews. During these editorial reviews, our editors are reviewing for grammar, spelling, punctuation. If they find anything that they think maybe seems wrong about that item and it's related to content, that will go back to our content experts and they'll review again. So after we've gone through our kind of internal Pearson processes where we've created the art, we've done our fact checking, we've validated that the items meet the alignment to the standard that we're looking to assess, then we would send those items to the Department of Education, and their content and curriculum experts would review the items as well. They're looking for many of the same things that we did, making sure that we've done our job, right? So it's another gate point to make sure that all of the things that we expect to be done have been done. And at that point, when those items go through the department's QC processes and they have provided us feedback, we'll incorporate any feedback that they have, of course. And once those items are clean, we'll say, so nice and shiny, we will have Tennessee educator review meetings. Typically, these happen in the entire month of June. We basically take over a couple of locations in Nashville, and we bring in educators from across the state to review these items. They're looking at these items to make sure, are they grade level appropriate? Is the vocabulary at the right level for that grade? Is it assessing the standard as they would expect? Is this how they teach that standard in the classroom? Based on how they're teaching that standard in the classroom, is this something that they would expect their students to know? And so that's a really important process. Last year we had over 500 educators that we had at our meetings, whether it be for item review, for scoring reviews, but we think that's a really important part of the process because they're in school teaching kids. They know how they're teaching, they know what they're teaching, they know the standards better than anyone. And so it's really important part of the process for us to have those educators part of those meetings and to make sure that we are meeting the mark for them. So one of the other things that they're looking at too is not only the content review, is the content appropriate, but also bias, sensitivity. Is there anything about an item, a reading passage that might not be appropriate for students here? I know one of the things that we had to do kind of at the last minute a couple of years ago was really, after the tornado went through East Nashville, we had to look through and see, is there anything related to weather that might be a trigger for kids in some of these passages or the science items? Because the last thing we'd want to do is set a child off on a foot where they feel like they are, there's something that's upset them and they're not able to, perform their best on that day. So then after we do those educator reviews, we take all of that feedback from the educators and we work with the department to reconcile that and create the final items that then will be field tested. Are there any questions about this process?
Representative Hakeem, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Thank you, ma'am. You used the word bias, and that may be sort of in a line of my question. In dealing with our standards and the development of this process, I don't know if it's appropriate to take into consideration that the different environments that young people come from. Yep. And where in one community they may be familiar with a context of how something is done in another area, community that not. Do we take anything of that nature into consideration?
Absolutely, and that is something that we do at the very beginning of the process. I think especially in ELA, where we have students reading passages, these could be excerpts from previously printed material, and so it's really important that those are reviewed thoroughly and go through not only our experts but the department's experts as well, and then educators are the final stop with that as well, because we do think that is absolutely important.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you. Chairman Sapiki, you're recognized.
Thank you. A couple questions here. So this is a timeline you've laid out here. So from the time that Pearson starts this process, how long does it take to get a finished product that's ready to be delivered to the students?
So this particular part of the process for the item writing piece takes about a year. So right now we're in the phase where we are sending lots of batches of items to the department right now, and they're sending them back to us. This year we're creating about 6,700 test items. So we like to chunk those up into nice little batches, a few at a time, so that they can flow through not only our processes, but the departments. And then, like I said, in June, we will meet with educators. We are meeting, I think, the entire month of June to have them review all of these items. And there will not be an item that goes on the assessment that has not gone through that gate point with educators reviewing it. And I do have another slide here about kind of where we take off from here, which is into the field testing process. And that is obviously, an additional piece of time. But I would say from the time that standards are created to the time that we have completed standard setting where cut scores have been established and then reports are going out, that can be anywhere from 3 to 4 years.
Follow up.
Yes, Chairman Sapicki.
All right, so in the process, we know about how long it takes, right? We just got done with the math standards. So now you have to, now the process starts over, a new process starts over to evaluate the new standards. So now we're on that timetable again, right? So you really don't react until we create standards and then you start your work, right?
Absolutely. So currently, the math item bank, so all of the items that were assets that the department had, before these standards were reset, our teams have been doing a thorough alignment review for the past 4 months, where they look at the old standards, they look at the new standards, and they see which items can transfer over, right? And how do they map to those new standards? Because these are all assets that the state has paid for, and we want to make sure that, we're taking that value forward wherever we can. In this case for math, there are some places where there are new standards, and there are no items currently in the bank. So our teams will go through this process to write those new items according to those standards.
And then last question on this one is, the Tennessee Educator Review section, right? What happens if our Tennessee educators object to an item? What is it thrown out?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times the conversations are very intense in those rooms where educators are, if someone thinks that an item has enough value, they think that it measures or it shows the proper depth of knowledge for a grade level, maybe they'll suggest an edit. Well, maybe we could change that word, or maybe, we should change the name from a boy to a girl, because I feel like we've had a lot of names in the questions that were boys. Something simple like that, we would just change and we would revise that, and then it would be accepted. But if there is enough concern in the room that educators have about an item, we will decline it, and we will put it in a status that is do not use, and it will not even be in the bank eligible for creation of a test.
Thank you. Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Lady. And just a kind of a follow-up, you mentioned the word content bias. Is there another term, I think, if I remember, cultural awareness in developing test questions? The reason I ask, this has been an issue. I sat on the NAEP board, and when you design a test for all 50 states, common test, how you ask a question from a student that may grow up in St. Louis and know a lot about baseball, and a student in another state who may have never even heard of baseball. And when you have a reading exam, are y'all challenged a lot by that for Tennessee, or is that a different level other than Pearson?
Well, I will say, since we are creating this test just for you all based on your standards and your students, it allows us to make sure that the passages, let's say, that we're creating are appropriate for Tennessee students, and that they would have that prior cultural awareness that they would need in order to feel comfortable reading and answering questions related to that. So I would say that's the difference probably between having kind of a national test and national questions that you don't have customized for you versus what we're doing for you, which is very custom, very specific to Tennessee. And, that is absolutely a focus of our content teams when they're creating these items.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
All right, next on our list, we have Representative Glenn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When you all are thank you for being here, by the way, I'm sorry. When you all are designing your test and you establish the timeline of how long it should take a student to take those tests, how do y'all get to that number? Because is it my understanding that the average TCAP for a third grader is 80 minutes. Is that correct?
So there are allowable testing times that are created by the department and shared with districts to help them administer the test and schedule. I would say that those timetables err on the side of making sure that students have adequate time and don't feel rushed. Now we can see specifically with computer-based tests, for instance, we know exactly how long those take, because from the time that a student logs in with their username and password to the time that they submit, we can capture all of that. And I will say in general, in my experience over the years, most students work more quickly than those published testing times.
Yes, Representative Glenn.
So you're saying that 80 minutes is probably about right for a third grader?
I would say that the 80 minutes is built in for students who maybe, aren't, it's not your average student necessarily, right? They're wanting to make sure that students don't feel rushed, don't see other kids around the room and worry that they're running out of time, or see the time that the teacher's posted on a board and worry, oh gosh, I'm not fast enough. I do know now there's also an option where parents can request additional time for students. So I think that has come from a good place and will help students that do feel like they need time. So parents can request that now for their students if they feel like their student will need more time. But I would say in general, the times are plenty for students to finish the test in an adequate time.
Yes, Representative Glenn.
Thank you for that. I'll just be honest. I think 80 minutes, asking 8, 9 grade kids to sit in a room for 80 minutes and don't move, don't talk to your buddy, don't look at the wall. It's really difficult. So I challenged that to say, is there a way to maybe break that test down into to less than 80 minutes a time period? We sit in these chairs for an hour and we get up constantly.
Right.
We check our phone constantly. And again, we're asking 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds to sit still for 90 minutes, 80 minutes. And that is a tough deal. So if there's some kind of study that says, the 80 minutes works better than 40 minutes, I'd definitely like to see that. But
well, I will just say that, time and getting feedback from administrators and educators is definitely something that I know the department takes into account. For instance, last year there was some feedback about a science subpart. So the test, we're not asking students to just sit down and take a whole big long test in most cases at one time, right? It's broken up into different sessions, and I do not have the testing times memorized. I will admit to that, but we do try to break those up, and we do look at from year to year. I know the department gets feedback from districts, and so last year, based on some feedback from administrators, we did break up the science test a little differently for grade 5 because it seemed like students needed some more time. And so that is definitely something that, again, listening to educators, they said we need more time, our kids need more time, and the department said okay, and we made all the necessary updates and all of the test administration scripts and things that teachers read to make sure that that was in alignment with educator and department expectations.
thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I begin, is this open question, or is there still more presentation to come?
I still have more presentation.
Then
More
I'll hold my questions.
Okay. Okay, members, we are going to, take that opportunity. Oh. Is it on this part of the slide?
Well, I guess, or it could be any part of it. I'll be quick if you don't
Okay.
mind, Madam Chair.
Yes,
And thank you,
yes.
Madam Chair. Just a quick question, and we often hear Tennessee standards are much higher than other states around us. In your opinion, do you think Tennessee standards are too high?
I would say that I have not been part of an alignment study to measure your standards against other state standards, right? I know that your standards were created based off of educator and public opinion and reviewed by educators. And so I don't have any information to tell you whether or not, a study has been done that says the alignment from Tennessee according to Kentucky or another state and how that differs. I can just say, based off of our most recent experience with the change in standards to math, where we found some places where we needed to fill there were some new standards that we need to have some questions for. We did go out there and look and see, is there a faster way for us to do this? Could we utilize items from another bank in order to allow us to create this test a little faster? And get, assess students and find out what they know a little sooner. And when our content teams did that, they they weren't finding great alignment to other states. They found a lot of common areas where a large percentage of the standards overlapped heavily, and they could see where those items could meet Tennessee standards. But then you also have some unique standards that don't necessarily align exactly with other state or national standards as well.
And one follow-up. As a parent with 2 children in Tennessee schools, are you satisfied with our standards?
I will say I have been very happy with the work that my kids have done. I know one of the things that I saw, and my son took the grade 3 test last year, right? He's a 4th grader. I still carry around his report, right? Because for me, it's really valuable to see, and a good reminder to me, not only as somebody that works at Pearson, but as a parent, like, what does this mean, right? Like, this means things to parents, and I get to experience that as a parent as well, which I'm very, blessed to be able to do. But, Wyatt met expectations last year on ELA, math, and science. For ELA, it wasn't as great, though, because he absolutely did a horrible job on the writing prompt. I don't know what happened there, but he did terrible. I asked him later when I saw this report card and I was like, "What happened, buddy?" And he said, "Mom, I hate to write paragraphs." And I was like, "Yeah, but as an adult, you're going to have to write paragraphs. So I need you to learn to love to write paragraphs." But that's a conversation that I had with his teacher. And she told me about all the great things that they were doing. And I've seen some of that work coming home. Different essays that he's written, annotated feedback from teachers about where he could, be more descriptive, or how he had basically just repeated something 3 times that he read in the passage instead of giving his authentic, answer to the question. And so I think that is something that, has been really great to see. I know my daughter, one of the things I'm really excited about is, as a 6th grader, she has the opportunity to take 7th grade math. I think that's amazing that she has that opportunity. Before she was placed in 7th grade math this year, her teacher and her administrators at her elementary school took into account her grades, a placement test that they have in the district, and her TCAP scores, and then just her teacher's general recommendation that she felt like Zoe should move forward into 7th grade math instead of 6th. So all of those things were a factor, and for me, I felt really great knowing that all of those things were considered, when my daughter was placed in 7th grade math this year instead of 6th grade. So I would say, from my parental perspective, thank you so much. I think what you're doing here is great, and I've seen really great things from teachers and had really great conversations with my students' teachers, and maybe I've even asked questions that, a lot of parents don't know to ask, but I do, and I hope that there's a time and place where we can make sure that more parents do know what to ask. And I will say, I don't advertise that I work at Pearson with my kids' teachers. I feel like that's the kind of pressure no teacher needs. They just need to know that I'm Wyatt's mom or I'm Zoe's mom, and so that has always been really great.
Well, thank you for being here today.
Yeah.
All right, members, we are going to continue the presentation, and we will take further questions. But if you will continue,
Sure.
please. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So after those items have gone through all of the checks that we have internally at Pearson with the department, through educators, and have given that mark of approval to be used on a test, those new items are field tested. So part of the analysis that we do when we review the item bank is we look at how many students do we have in this grade, in this subject, how many new questions could we field test on a form, and make sure that we have the correct number of responses that we're going to get. So we want to make sure that we have a large number of students taking these test questions when they're in the field test stage, to make sure that we can analyze that data, make sure there's no flags for diff, which would mean we have one population of students that's performing drastically differently on an item than another, which might lead to some of the questions that we're talking about with, bias or sensitivity, and to make sure that they're good quality items that will measure what we're looking for. So that data review is completed. This is something Pearson does. It's something we have as part of our item banking platform as well, where you can get a pretty little green, yellow, red kind of assessment there. And we share all of that information with the department. And ultimately, we will recommend items that maybe shouldn't be used because the data is not in alignment with the expectations that we would have for items that would be on an operational test. And at that point, we provide that recommendation to the department, and they say, I approve it or I don't approve it. And if they don't approve of an item, based off the data that we see, we put that in that do not use bucket as well. And that does not go on a test. If the data is good, and after reviewing that data, everyone agrees, all the content experts at Pearson and the department and our psychometricians on both sides agree, then that item, can be placed into a status where it is available for operational testing. And so the field test items are the items that students does not impact their score, right? These are items that we are trying out. We want to keep building the item bank, make sure that we have good coverage across all of the standards so that we can build test forms that meet the blueprint, right? And those blueprints are posted online. It says this is the percentage of items that will appear on the test that go into this reporting category and standards, and all of those things are laid out. So we're really making sure that our item bank can meet that blueprint because that's important, right? That's your public face to educators and parents of what is going to be assessed on the test. So if we're in a year like we're going to be for math here soon, and we have new standards that we are, having on the forms for the first time, we will conduct what's called a standard setting. And during that standard setting, that's where the cuts at the performance levels will be set. So we bring in educators, we bring in our psychometric standard setting team, we work with the department as well, and we host a meeting. And this is typically, depending on how many grades and subjects that we're looking at, it's typically a week-long process where we meet with educators daily. We review the items and test questions that were on the form, and they tell us, this is what I think a student at this grade should know. This is where the cut points should be for this. And, our team's there to support by providing, data from the test forms and the data on how students performed on items to help teachers, with their assessment. But, at the end of that meeting, we walk away with a recommendation from educators on the cut points by performance level. So here, the different colors represent the different performance levels. So those were selected. And I think this gas gauge is probably a pretty good representation, for how to think about those cuts, right? You're kind of going up to a level or you're not. You're staying within that. So educators set those, and then those are provided to the department for approval, and then the state board for adoption. And then at that point, that is when we take those cuts and infuse them into our programming for scoring and reporting, and that's how we create these individualized student report cards. So this says Wyatt's name on it, it says the school he's at, it says the school district he's in, and frequently throughout this, and I'm happy to share this with anybody that wants to see it afterwards, it refers to Wyatt. And it tells specifics about, the different, for math, gosh, there's kind of an alert here for computation with whole numbers. So he's maybe struggling there a little bit more than in some areas, and so maybe I need to talk to his teacher about that. But really, that standard setting, those cuts set by educators that then we just create into a pretty report that can go out to parents and districts. That is how that process works. And the standard setting, obviously this is, and I think I have later in the deck, the state board current schedule for standards changes. And so we're following that schedule. And so the standard setting will be kind of a big event. It's kind of the Super Bowl of assessment, and working with those educators to set those cut points. So that's not something that occurs annually, right? It would only be in conjunction with a change in standards at the state level. Or, at times there's a possibility that a content validation is done, which is very similar to a standard setting, where maybe after, years of having the same standards, we review that alignment again to make sure that, those cuts that were set 6 years ago, educators still agree with those cuts today. And then after that standard setting is completed, as I said here, those results, they not only go to parents, but to educators as well. So we have an educator portal. Educators can go in and review, and I think I have a mock-up of one of the reports that goes to educators that shows at the standard level how their students performed. It's just a good feedback loop for them to see areas where, their kiddos might have struggled a little bit more versus others. So we definitely have that open, transparent loop with educators. As part of the post-administration analysis, we have a team of psychometricians at Pearson. We have a team of psychometricians at the department. We work with the Tennessee Technical Advisory Committee, which is a committee that is made up of professors from across the country that specialize in this work and have experience not only working in Tennessee, but many of them on national tests or with other states as their technical advisory committee members as well. And then obviously, as part of this analysis process, the U.S. Department of Education, through peer review, there's supporting documentation that Pearson provides to the department, who then submits to the U.S. Department of Education to see and get feedback on, how they're doing, where areas are concerned from the U.S. DOE, and, if the department is implementing the work for assessment as expected by the department. So part of the post-administration analysis is really, as I talked about earlier with the field test data, this would be done with the operational data. So that student response data is received and the item statistics are reviewed for any potential concerns, discrepancies, kids aren't performing the way we would expect to perform, or as I said before, maybe one population of students is performing differently. That would be something we would definitely want to look into. And then we have an equating analysis that's conducted, and this is done by our psychometric teams internally at Pearson, reviewed by the department. We have a third-party psychometric group that reviews this information as well. And this is just to make sure that as tests are built each year, we don't repeat all of the same questions each year, but the purpose of this particular part of the process is to ensure that we have comparable scores from one administration to the next. And so our psychometric teams complete that work. Then, as I said, we do have those external reviews for equating results. And the scale scores tables, before those are released, those are validated and reviewed by multiple groups as well. And here's a picture of that. It's a mock-up, so you can see it's dummy data on here that we have. But for the standards analysis report that districts get, and you'll see there that it has the name of the teacher on it, right? So teachers get this report to see how their students are doing. It is based off of, this is a science example, but you can see all the standards there on the left. So then we're reporting to teachers how their students did at a standards level. And they can access that in kind of a PDF view, and they can also go into the educator portal and download and look at Excel and kind of slice and dice that data however best suits them. Any questions about this phase? We kind of moved quickly from items that are approved by educators, and then now they're on forms. And
I believe on this exact part, Representative Cochran, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Lady. So on the post-administration analysis, I feel like in the time that I've been here, we've talked about that in this committee and education admin and as far as analyzing previous TCAP tests. When that comes up, it's like we've asked for the Kennedy assassination files or the nuclear code. So tell me, why is that? Like, is there ever a time when I can look at the 2020 full TCAP test for third grade in Tennessee? Like, is that ever possible?
It could be possible. It currently isn't. And the reason for that is not because anyone doesn't want to provide that, but I will say, so we've been the assessment item development vendor for the past 2 years now. When we started this work, the bank of items that the state of Tennessee had was very shallow. So in order to be able to release those tests annually like that, our work, as I said before, we've really been trying to build up that bank and field test as many items as possible to create a larger bank that will allow the state flexibility to do things like that. So it really all starts with a good, healthy, large bank, and that has been our focus for the last 2 years to build that up so that things like that can be done.
Where are we in that process? How far away are we from the point where we can start looking at these, if not annually, at least every other year? This is my 5th year in office, and we have literally talked about this every year. Like, hey, can we at some point see a TCAP test? And it's like heads explode. So how far are we from that?
Well, I know right now our content and publishing teams are creating released item booklets for items that we're trying to release this as soon as possible so that teachers can use them before TCAP testing now even. But we are working to create a subset of items that will be released. I think in maybe what you're talking about too is that kind of full transparency with a full test being released. And I think we're probably a couple of years away there. But I do think we've made really good progress. And I know in recent conversations with the department, they have made those tests available to folks to come in and review if that's something you wanted to do in kind of a secure way. But I mean, the goal obviously would be to be as transparent as possible, provide as many of these items to teachers as possible. Every time we release items, we also put them into the formative bank that the department has provided to districts for free. It's a tool that we call SchoolNet. And so all of those test questions that are released and prior released items are in that bank of items, and we have districts that are actively using that every week. I pull a report each Monday, and this Monday, I think the increase in the number of tests that were taken in that formative platform it was like 15,000 tests that had been taken just in a week in that platform. So I know that educators are really eager to get those items and to see those items and to use them in their classroom. So our goal is obviously to release as many of those as we can while keeping the integrity of the bank and our ability to create test forms annually that meet the blueprint and are comparable.
Yeah. And so I guess that would just be my challenge to you and the department. We got to get there. We've been talking about it for a half a decade. And so I know it's not meant to be secretive, but it feels that way.
Yeah, I understand.
And it feels that way to educators who cannot see that test year after year after year. And year after year, we keep saying, well, soon you'll be able to see that. We've got to get there faster.
That is definitely our goal.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. And so that's my challenge. And let me follow up with one last question. So if a teacher has a classroom of students that says, hey, Ms. Smith, on item 18, there was no right answer. Of course, the teachers can't look at the test, but if you have multiple students come to a teacher and say, look, we have no clue, right? And you have your best students who all bring an issue with a particular question, how is that even addressed? How does a teacher even bring that to someone's attention?
Yeah, so educators are instructed. There is, I know, training that's done in the schools. I think right now I know some of my team is with the department in Cookeville today, and they're doing a regional assessment meeting. And so at those meetings, this one is specific to district testing coordinators. They are trained on all of the processes for this year. Anything that's changed from last year, kind of some of the highlights, especially with us moving more online this year, making sure that everyone understands what's happening there. And then we're also meeting with technology administrators as well to make sure that they understand what's required of them to make sure that their schools and districts are ready for online testing as well. So we have that. So if an educator were to bring forward a concern from a student about an item, they know based on the training that's provided that they can go to their building testing coordinator. Their building testing coordinator will notify their district testing coordinator, and they will get in touch with the department and or Pearson. And at that point, we will have our content experts review the item. Is there something wrong with this item? Or was the teacher trying to be sensitive to the fact that they're not supposed to look at the test question, that they didn't maybe see it fully, right? But we definitely investigate any instance reported of that. And if there is a flaw with the item, is it a field test item? Okay, well, the student will not be scored, that will not be count against them anyway. But that would be something that would initiate a do not use for that item anymore. So if an item did get through all that process that we talked about before and it still had a flaw like that, we would definitely take action, and we would make sure that it didn't impact student scores.
You're welcome. Thank you, Chairman Sapicki.
And getting into standards again, so if Tennessee has, in third grade, they have 60 standards, right? So when Pearson creates the test to match those 50 or 60 standards, right? Mm-hmm. Do you omit any? I mean, does Pearson just say we're not going to test that? Does Pearson add any standards that they think that should be known? Or are you pretty much just what the standards you're permitted, you're sent to, you go ahead and you make a test according to those standards?
There are definitely no additions. This is not the place where we are being creative. That is not something that is permitted. All of the test questions are based off of the standards and meet the blueprint that is based off of the standards as well. So those are all in alignment every time we develop a test.
Follow up.
Yes, Chairman.
So as long as a teacher who gets the standards from the state, as long as a teacher has enough time to teach all those standards to that student, then they would have possibly, hopefully, some working knowledge of all the questions on the test, where a student could get 100%, right?
That's correct.
And if a teacher does not get to all the standards, that would put a student at a disadvantage.
I would say that would be a concern.
Thank you.
Members, we have just another slide or two. Is your question for the, okay, that's what I was going to ask. I have a couple here. Representative Johnson, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is not a test that yields a reading level, correct? It tests ELA skills, but it doesn't yield a specific reading level, grade level?
Do you mean a Lexile level?
Yes.
We are producing Lexiles now, and those are reported to educators and parents. So we did complete the study, the research study last year, and that did allow us to report Lexiles. So educators and parents have Lexile information, and I know on our reports in the parent portal, we're definitely trying to provide parents information about what next. And so if your child is not at the Lexile level that they should be for their grade, here are some books. Here's a resource for you to look at where you can get books for free in order to, provide, not provided by Pearson, obviously, but provided by sources that are available, here in the state already, but making sure that parents can target that to the books that their kiddos would need to help them improve.
Yes, Representative.
Yes, and also, so the scoring level with advanced, proficient, and do you all call it below proficient or approaching proficient?
Let us see.
Because there's a different one.
We have below expectations, approaching expectations,
Okay.
met expectations, and exceeded expectations.
Okay. So what we have heard from people testifying over the last week or two, both in this committee and in another committee, is that the way Tennessee scores the test, we are only including in the top two levels. When you hear people say around here a lot, only 33% of Tennessee third graders can read. However, what we have been told from presenters over the last 2 weeks is that we are not including the average third grader in either proficient or advanced, that is in the approaching category, and we're not counting those folks. And that the average, like when you take a bell curve, the straight 50, which is your average third grade student, actually falls in the approaching level. So we are not including a bunch of third graders that do read on level. And so my concern is we really have for a long time been misrepresenting who is actually reading. Well, certainly it's not good enough, and we've got to improve. But however, we had 3 presenters, and I'm sorry, I cannot remember. It was this committee in sub, and I can't remember where they were from, tell us this information. And then we also they had an expert in the other committee from Mississippi saying that we did not include all of the average, starting with the average third grader where they should be, because they were in the below category. And so we were not including all of our folks who actually were third grade readers in that percentage.
So there are a lot of very technical aspects, to the psychometric analysis that's completed. And so I will say that there are a lot of terms that are used that could probably, that you'd really have to dig in deeper on, right? You say average what? Grade level for what? Grade level for Tennessee, grade level for Tennessee standards, or grade level as it sits from kind of more of a national norm perspective. So I would say that I would be happy to provide, some additional follow-up information that kind of digs in on those questions specifically, if that would be helpful to this group. And I would be happy to bring in any of our experts in the psychometric, from the psychometric side of the house at Pearson to really dig in there.
But is that factual? I mean, what these folks have been telling us that, and when I say average, we had someone demonstrate with a bell curve, and they have, the 50%, and typically, 50% and above is your average third grade student in whichever subject matter that was for, and that specific one was reading. And so, I think that what I'm trying to get at is by only saying that students, third graders who can read on grade level are in those 2 categories is completely false. And am I correct in that?
I definitely would want to defer that question, to get a little deeper into what you've seen. I haven't seen the information that's been presented to you all before to know. I mean, we're talking about, this is where we really get into, I'm going to be non-technical here, psychometric garbledy-goop, right? So, there's equating that we do. It's based off IRT, right? There are so many different factors that kind of go into the statistical validity and reliability of these tests, and I am absolutely not the expert to speak to you guys in that realm, but I would be happy, again, to follow up and bring in one of our experts to get a little deeper into that to make sure that you all feel comfortable about your understanding of that process.
And just one last thing.
Yes, Representative.
Because I have multiple of these, but I just had my assistant bring down one where the student shows below in ELA, math, science, and social studies. However, their grades are all B's and C's. Their in-class testing that is done individually with them is all either mastered or on track.
Right.
And so, many times in that approaching category, those students are where they need to be. And I would hate to think that we would be holding back and retaining students that are right there on grade level, but that the way the test is scored and read is misinterpreted, in my view.
Well, I will say, thank you for that, more broad picture of kind of the use case that you have there. I will say not every assessment is made equal, for sure, right? And there are definitely, one of the webinars that I was at yesterday with multiple districts, they were sharing the different assessments that they use throughout the year, right? This test for TCAP is a summative test. It's a snapshot at the end of the year. But districts are using so many different assessments, based off of what they feel the need is for their students and their district to measure progress throughout the year. And I definitely heard acknowledgments from those districts of, well, we know And they analyze the data of all of these things, right? Like our kids took, the universal readiness screener, or they took a case assessment, they took this, and they analyze the data there and they compare it back to TCAP. And they say, well, based off of what we saw here, it doesn't exactly align to TCAP, but we know that if students reach, X score on this case assessment, that they will be in good shape for TCAP.
Okay. And I think that the screeners, the one that they give at the beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year, those are all. I think that they have to choose between 3 or something like that. So they're all approved by the state and all of that. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Members, like I said, do you have a question, Representative Glenn, for this part? All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When do the teachers receive the results of the TCAP after it's been given?
So I cannot tell you the exact time that teachers receive them, right? Because some of this is us providing them to district administrators, and then how that flows through the district is obviously at the district's discretion, right? But we are reporting raw scores. I think this year our published milestone date for that is May 19th. And then we have what's called a consolidated data file. So it's kind of the larger aggregated results for students that include the performance levels. I'm doing this off the top of my head, but we can look it up online too. I believe our date for that is May the 26th. So that is, I'm within a day memory. My memory's not so good these days, but I'm pretty close there. So within a week or so after providing the raw scores, we're following up with those consolidated data files.
No
Yes.
problem. My memory fades every day. Every morning I wake up, I think I lose a brain cell. So no problem with that. So if the scores are not coming out until the end of May or mid-May, school is about over. How do teachers know who passed the TCAP, and if that child is going to be using the after school and summer school program?
Right, understood. So one of the things that, so the test administration currently ends on May 5th. We are allowing districts another week to send in all of their paper-based materials to us. So those will be received in our warehouse. They are unpackaged. They are, slitted so that we can scan them through our scanners. And then that's when, if it's something that needs an essay score, one of our scorers will review that, and it'll go through that process. So in a matter of a week, we're after the test is over for anything paper-based, we are definitely moving fast to make sure that we can meet that May 19th date. I do think this is a focus every year of ours to try and see what we can do to get feedback to districts and educators and parents, faster, because we know that's important. I do know that we have set a pretty good track record as compared to other years, the last few years since we've been doing this work here in the state, which we're very proud of. And we will continue to look for areas and ways that we can expedite that. One of the things that I think will be very helpful is, the move to online testing. Our EOC scores, we posted those files to districts, both raw scores and the consolidated data files, early for fall, because we're able to get that information through all of the processes, all of the validations, and create those reports and then post them for districts. So online testing definitely expedites. We're not waiting on somebody to take boxes, or have a UPS pick them up, have them shipped to us, have them, they have to sit in acclimation to make sure that the paper is at a proper moisture level where we can scan those through our high-powered scanners. And so anyway, we do expect to have some efficiencies this year with 6 through 8. And if we can ever better a date that we have posted, we will always do that. That is probably one of the most rewarding things that we could do is beat a date that we have published to the public, but we also want to make sure that we've gone through all of our QC steps and all of our validation processes to make sure that the information that we're releasing we can stand behind it.
Yes.
Thank you for that, because I did have a school board town hall the other day, Thursday, and that was one of the main questions that they had a complaint with, that the testing that they are being required to use as the standard for third grade retention, they're not even getting it until May, and so how can they properly adjust or properly, work around that? So I appreciate that answer, and I appreciate all you doing to try to expedite that to get it to our instructors so we can have plenty of time to take care of our kids. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And for grade 3 specifically, we know the importance of this for educators, administrators, and parents. And so while it's not published publicly, our teams are, working on a schedule where our goal is to be able to expedite grade 3 and provide some preliminary results earlier. But obviously, there are a lot of factors that go into that, especially for third grade. When do we get the boxes of materials to even scan and score those? But our goal is to be able to expedite grade 3 so that for that very reason, we understand it's a difficult position for districts and teachers and parents, and we want to be able to support that.
Thank you so much. I think you got another slide for us, so if you'll get back to that, and then we'll take more questions, members.
And I think we were tickling a little bit on these topics with some of the questions that we had a little bit about different assessments and, students' grades versus the TCAP. And so here's just kind of a comparison at a very high level of the universal screener and the TCAP assessments. Right? The purpose of these two assessments is very different, but they're a great complement to each other. So I think this is an example of a place where in the state of Tennessee, you all have made changes recently. And these changes, based off of what I heard yesterday on a webinar, all the talk from districts sharing their data and information, and then, hopefully what we'll see in results will prove to be that this is very valuable, right? So the Universal Readiness Screener is something where we're really trying to provide information to teachers throughout the year. These, small snapshots. Am I on the right track? Are these students on the right track? Is there an area where they don't know the basic information that they need for reading and mathematics? And so, this is really about kind of finer skills that students are showing in the classroom. First, the summative test, which is that end-of-year assessment, and this is really about those standards, right? And are they meeting the performance levels as set out by educators for their grade and their subject? And actually, that was a cool thing about being a parent too. I actually have my Universal Readiness Screener results here for my son, who is in 4th grade. And you can see these reports look very different, right? We're providing different level of information with these different assessments. And together though, they provide a lot of detail for teachers and parents that can be used to help kids. I think that's the last slide. I know we've been doing Q&A along the way, but.
Yes, and we have a list. Thank you so much. Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to ask you some questions for the record, and then some I hope you can answer. You made an offer before our meeting here to send some of your psychometricians around. Specifically, I am concerned with validity checks, repeatability checks within the test, and then what your company does with those, and what reports and feedback you give to the state. This may be my fault because I haven't asked in the right place, but I haven't gotten any of that feedback from the department. The other question relates to bias checks. Bias in a broad sense can be determined by just looking at a whole, but we have over 1 million students in the state, of which about 400,000 are K through 3. So we can do demographic slices, urban versus rural, whatever. And you can determine if there's a bias present by question. I have not seen any of that information. Do you have it available?
We do have all that information in our item bank at an item level.
All right. I would like to ask this question now if your crazy measurer can get that information to me, I'd appreciate it. But this next question is in direct relationship to concerns that all of us have. The NEEP scores, which are sampled across the state as opposed to every student taking them, should have a direct comparison to our TCAP scores, at least in broad generalities as capability, especially in the third grade reading category. And so my question to you is, does your test have checks and balances against that NEEP score to determine how your system is aligned?
So we currently do not have any, sort of research studies that we're doing to review alignment between the Tennessee TCAP test and the NAEP test. Again, I think the NAEP test is a very different assessment than the TCAP test, based off of that very information that you provided about the subset of students that are taking that test. And I think, if that is something that should be pursued, it is certainly research that I'm sure there would be some people eager to complete.
Follow up, please.
Yes, Chairman.
The answer to your question that is implied there is yes, it should be pursued, because the NEEP test is a nationwide score, and Tennessee and all other states are compared to that. When we're recruiting companies or when people are considering moving to our states, looking at the education system, they're going to look at that. And broad generalities like, can students read on grade level? Now, I understand all kinds of different metrics might go into, quote, reading on grade level, but as a generality, there should be some alignment there. If the NEEP scores say that 2/3 of our students are not reading on grade level, that's based on a sample, and the TCAP scores, which is based on all students, says that that's not true, we have a major disconnect. On the other hand, if NEEP says 2/3 and TCAP says, well, it's 60%, there's a general alignment there from which we can make decisions and change our system if necessary. Without that information, without that confidence that we have a comparison, we cannot. So that's one of the challenges I'll put before you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Next on our list, let's see, we're trying to see since people left. He just left. Representative Chairman White, I'm sorry. Thank you, Chairman White.
Thank you. Could you go back to your very last slide? To me, that's kind of hitting on a mother lode question for me. We're challenged right now with the third grade retention law we put in place January 2021. And as you know, it's based upon the end of course third grade TCAP assessment. You've got to score above proficiency, right? Back on the universal readiness screener, and we're also talking, about that, benchmarks and screeners throughout the year. How are those two aligned? If you do well on the screener, should you do well on TCAP, or could there be an anomaly there?
Well, anomalies, that's by definition an anomaly, but I will say that the purpose of that universal readiness screener is really to make sure that teachers have that guidance along the way, because at the end of the year, that's a snapshot, it's too late, right, to impact that student's knowledge. And so really the screener it's a completely different assessment than TCAP, and it's measuring different things as I can even see as a parent, right, on these two different score reports. But the universal readiness screener is getting down to a very finite skill level, where the TCAP assessment is looking at that more broad picture across the standards.
So if a student does well, now also talk about the benchmarks that we give also. So if a student does well throughout the year on the screener, let me ask it one more time. Should they do well on the TCAP or vice versa?
I don't have data that says exactly how those two things would compare, but I think we're saying that it would inform their success on TCAP if they're doing if they're meeting the grade level, if they're meeting their grade level marks in the universal readiness screener, then I think you would say that the thought is that that student would be set up for the most success as they go into TCAP.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Vice Chairman Raper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to compliment you in the fact of the TCAP, how it aligns with standards. I'm as a former educator, I'm very impressed with that, and I always have been. I have a couple of major concerns that I want to say, and this is not necessarily aimed at TCAP, but I was just going to get your feedback on it. TCAP seems to me to be a state norm test and not a true national norm test. And I go back to something you said there that has some unique standards and some that do not align. Well, a true national norm is going to be exactly alignment of the subgroup that you're talking about. So my question is TCAP more of a, because it's fitting to the state standard, is it more state normed? And then my next question is, as far as my first concern, is where would exact questions as far as perfect alignment, how can we align perfectly to make it a national norm test?
So first of all of the data that is collected for the TCAP test, the only inputs to that data are Tennessee students, right? So there are no external state or students that are the data that's used as part of the scoring and reporting and psychometric processes. So this is all Tennessee in a box, nothing else touches it. And we take the seriousness of protecting that data very highly. On the, as it relates to more the question about national, there are alignment studies that can be done that show where there's alignment, where there is not. I mean, those are, again, research studies that could certainly be done with, and so, I mean, if that's, I think that is something that could possibly provide the information that you're looking for.
And that brings me to my first concern, and you actually made my point for me. Our data that we are reporting is basically national, is state normed on a national normed possibility. So we're talking about state norm data, but we're reporting to nationally and comparing all around the nation. So that's my first concern. That's not necessarily directed at TCAP. That's directed toward the process. Secondly, and I'm on maybe a couple of questions along this, is TCAP renormed each summer based on recent testing results?
So when you say renormed, do you mean that the cut scores where we're marking those performance levels, that those are changing? No, they are not. So those are set during that standard setting process that we discussed. So the state board approves the standards, and we write items, we field test them. They are on operational forums, and we complete a standard setting, and Tennessee educators set those cuts at the performance levels at that point in time. And so I think that depending on when standards were set, that can be for a longer or shorter period of time.
Okay, so let me ask you if this exists, or maybe I'm just confused about this. So I'm gonna base this on an arbitrary 100%, because that seems to be what we most understand, and a lot of teachers around the state base things on 100%. But if 1 year proficiency level was at, at 60, where 60 and above was proficient, and anything below was below proficient, okay? Is it possible that in looking at the next summer of possibly renorming, or you said you didn't exactly do that, is it possible to come back and look at the results, and based on a county that does extremely well like Williamson County, and I say that totally in a complimentary way, they do outstandingly well. Can they skew the scores, whereas maybe the next year it wasn't at 60, it would go at 62 in the same grade level. So in fourth grade, one year it was 60, but then the next year is a moving target and it went to 62. Is that possible?
So, and I think, and I'm happy to share these with you, even though, they are Wyatt's, but he did pretty good work. So I don't think I'd be ashamed to share those with you. But you can see on these reports here where we're even saying like below expectations, 200 to 321, approaching expectations, 322 to 358, right? Like these markers, we do not move these markers. These markers are set by educators based off of the standard setting and their review of what they believe that students in Tennessee are supposed to know on that grade level and at that performance level. And so those do not change. Now, your aggregated results for how did your student do according to the rest of the state or the rest of the district, obviously those things could change. And we do have, those are things that we report out to parents and districts as well. So I can see as a parent, where Wyatt is maybe not on point with the rest of the district or where he's maybe not on point with the rest of the state. Or where he's exceeding. Actually, that happened once, but mostly it was that he was slightly below where, the district average was. So, that is information that we're providing, but we're not moving. I mean, there's a literal needle on this report that is moving, but it is not moving at the basis of where those cuts are annually.
Because my point was going to be this. If we are actually, moving scores, we would probably be the only test that I could think of. I mean, if you have a contractor's test or an insurance license or a bar exam or whatever, I mean, they know in the beginning what the actual score is to pass that test, and then it shouldn't change. Like one year it goes from 300 questions to 304 questions, so it's the only one I know of if that is existent. And so I had concerns about both of those, but thank you very much.
Yeah, the teams work really hard to make sure that we can construct test forms each year that provide that stability, right? That we're meeting the blueprint. It really all starts back at the beginning with the standards. The standards, creating the items into the blueprint, into the test form, where we can create these forms annually that allow us to provide scores for students that are comparable.
Thank you. Members, I'm going to remind y'all and our guests, we have to be out of here in about 7 minutes. So I have a couple of people left on our list. So Representative Leatherwood, you're next. No pressure.
Well, I can help you out with this. Now, my question was concerning the universal screeners and the TCAPs as well. Both those test reading, don't they?
Yes, but in slightly different ways, right? So
yeah, as I understand, the TCAP is maybe a broader test and less specific to just reading, can have grammar and other aspects into it. The universal screener, as I understand, there's 3 tests through the year. And is the universal screener, do you think that is a valid test for determining students' reading ability?
Yeah, so the Universal Readiness Screener is a nationally normed test, and it is really used to provide teachers with that snapshot. So one of the things, to be specific example, that the Universal Readiness Screener does review is students, I think we call it something fancier. It's something fancier on this report that I got, but really, how do they read out loud, right? So that is a one-on-one test that's done with students, that portion of the test. for, that student to read out loud to that teacher and the teacher to, understand, how well they're performing that task. And so that's really looking at something, very different, right, than what we're doing on TCAP, but it's supporting, right, in a way.
That's one aspect of the screener. So you would say it is a valid test as far as evaluating the student's ability to
I would
read?
say that there is definitely research and data out there that I would be happy to get to you all that would show that the Universal Readiness Screener is accomplishing the job that it has been asked to do.
And is there any way to just pull out the reading portion of the TCAP? I mean, the actual reading, not grammar, not writing.
So there are definitely different standards that flow into reporting categories that measure each of those things. And so really, a teacher would be able to go back and look at those standards and see in those areas where their students, did better or where maybe they struggled.
And then it just seems to me if the Universal Screener is a valid test on reading and more focused just on reading, that would be a good determiner when deciding whether or not to promote.
I think that one of the sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think one of the things that differentiates these tests, and I think I am saying they are different tests, right? They are performing different jobs, but there are two jobs that would complement each other. I think one of the things as it relates to grade 3 specifically is that the standards that are here in Tennessee, the Tennessee Academic Standards, place a pretty large emphasis on the writing portion of the test. And so the Universal Readiness Screener does not measure those standards related to writing. And so that would be a place where, while it may be very supportive of providing information about reading and foundational reading skills needed, that would be an area where it would be lacking, and teachers and parents would not have information about how their students would.
I think many people, I'll put myself there, I feel like I read pretty well. My wife is a first grade teacher, though, and she can correct my grammar on a regular basis, and I rarely put anything out there to the public without my first grade teacher proofing it. And writing is a whole nother ballgame, too. And while I'm not, I don't want to downplay those are important, but if we're retaining students for writing ability, we should say we're retaining students at third grade because of their writing abilities or their grammar abilities, but we keep saying we're going to retain them based on their reading abilities. And therefore, I just think the Universal Screener that is more focused on the reading should be used initially when making that determination. Thank you. And I know that's not you doing this, but just trying to bring this out while I've got someone here that is very familiar with both tests. Thank you.
Thank you. And Representative Pickey?
A lot of prodding on universal screeners, trying to get you, and not trying to get you to say something, but trying to get you to admit something. Here's the question for you, point blank. Can the universal screeners supplant TCAP when we get the same information?
No.
Why?
Because you're measuring different information.
Okay. Are they given the same way as the TCAP test?
They are not. So the Universal Readiness Screeners are done in a non-secure way. A portion of the test is done, for like third grade. I know, for instance, one-on-one, and I know that because Wyatt scored really poorly in reading out loud to his teacher. And then the TCAP, obviously, that's, a secure online versus paper. So there are some, like third grade, there's a portion of the test that Wyatt is taking online for the Universal Readiness Screener, but we're not doing it that way for TCAP.
And benchmarks, can we use the benchmarks to supplant the TCAP test? Do they measure the same thing?
They are not measuring the same thing.
And are they given the same way?
The tests are not given the same way.
All right. How do you, a little off topic here, you went into this first screen that had all these different people from Tennessee, all these different teachers, and how does a teacher say, I'll be willing to do that? How do you screen who gets that job?
Right. So we work closely with the department here, and the department has a database that I think they're constantly having updated. They are asking for teachers, their specialties, what grades, what subjects, to make sure that then when they're recommending, teachers to go forward to these events, they're providing us with a list of these educators, and we're inviting them, and we meet with them and train them. And I think the rewarding thing about all of those educator meetings is that those educators walk away going, wow, I had no idea. And so I think the thing that we would definitely want to do is make sure that we can get as many educators, who are willing to come to these events and are ready, give them that option. I think it's a great learning opportunity. Our teams love it because it connects them to the teachers and the students in the state. And I think teachers walk away with a really good understanding of the assessment and feel like, they have, there's more transparency now than there was before.
And then the last question I have is this. If if a student would score approaching on the TCAP test, however, on the benchmarks, if they were given in the same kind of way as the TCAP would, a proctored test, would that give us enough validity to say with the approaching category on TCAP and a student that scores in a certain percentile on the benchmark, with the necessary supports going forward, would that give us enough confidence in those two evaluations of approaching on TCAP and a certain percentile on the benchmark? Would that give us enough validity to say we probably have confidence in those two, if they're given the same way, that student was showing enough ability to be able to move on to the next grade level, whether it be third, eighth, whatever?
I think that the idea of using, multiple assessments to really understand where a student sits is obviously a great idea. So many of your districts are doing it. Doing it at the state level as well. So I think anytime you can take a look at, more than one data point about a student, I think you'll learn something else.
In this slideshow, if you will give it to Chairman Moody so she can distribute to the committee, I'd love to have that information.
Great.
Thank you. You've been very, very helpful.
Thank you. And any other, I think a couple others mentioned some things that you said you could send. So anything that way you could send would be great and appreciated. Members, our time is up, so don't leave yet, though. We'll go back in session, and I'll recognize Vice Chair Raper.
Real quickly, I see one of my constituents, Miss Sandra Knight. I worked with her when I was on the county commission, former road superintendent, current engineer. Thank you for being here.
Yes, good to have you. And thank you so much again for making the trek here and spending the entire time with us. You've been very helpful, and we'll get that information out to you all members. And I will be happy to entertain going out of motion to adjourn. Thank you. We are adjourned.